Hello everyone, welcome back to another What I Watched video on this channel. I know it's only been about a week since I posted my last What I Watched video because of that big break I took. And yeah, I mean, at least I'm posting videos again now, so weird that there's two What I Watched videos kinda back-to-back weeks almost, but I mean, I'm posting again, and the other one was just super late. This one is actually on time this time. And yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. So first, I started off the month by watching the second film in George Romero's Dead trilogy, I guess, in his zombie trilogy. It is Dawn of the Dead, and this is basically a film that overall the premise is essentially these people get stranded in an abandoned shopping mall, and it's just how they survive and go about living, and you know, finding new places in the mall to get materials and all this sort of stuff. It's basically just an entire movie of these people doing what they need to do to survive and also to keep themselves entertained so they're not like going insane. I thought it was an overall good movie, but it did feel a little dragged out, it did feel a little long, and it definitely was trying to do a little too much, and at some points didn't have enough to do, but felt like it needed to drag that out. So I think definitely to improve this film, I would cut down the runtime and make sure everything that they do is like necessary to advancing the plot, and that they're not just meandering to kind of show what these people are doing at random times. And the characters are generally forgettable, but it's overall a entertaining and pretty fun movie. Then I rewatched The Karate Kid, and I still absolutely love this movie. Given my recent kind of rating slashes, this is no longer a 5 out of 5 because, I mean, it's The Karate Kid. I would not feel confident in calling this movie a masterpiece by any means, but it's still decently high up my favorites list just because of how much this movie means to me and how much fun I have watching this movie. It's just endlessly rewatchable and just an absolute ton of fun. Then I watched The Karate Kid Part 2 for the very first time actually, and it was pretty good. I like this sort of changing of pace from America to Okinawa and these sort of increased stakes almost. But at times it felt a little overly cheesy. Again, it kind of dealt with a lot of problems and issues with it being too long and not having enough story to tell. It kind of felt like they were force feeding us a lot of this plot, and it didn't feel fully natural like the first film did, where that was decently long, but there was so much to tell and so much to pack in that it all felt like not overstuffed or dragged out at all. It just felt pretty well paced overall, where this just had some overly cheesy moments and did feel a little dragged out at times, and I was a little uninterested, but overall still a fun time. Then directly after, I watched The Karate Kid Part 3 for the first time also, and I know a lot of people don't like this movie, but I actually preferred it to Part 2. I still prefer the original over them. It's by far my favorite, but this one was honestly like so stupid that it was really fun. It went over the top. Part 2 was a little stupid, but it kind of tried to keep it a little more grounded, where this one just went full bonkers. It was like Kreese like faking his death and coming back and all this weird stuff. It was wild, all over the place, and I kind of loved it for that. Then I watched Friday, which I don't have all that much to say about other than the fact that it's honestly really, really funny. Then I felt like I wanted to rewatch Before Sunrise, and it absolutely still holds up, and it honestly improves every viewing. Every time I watch this film, I try and have a different experience with it so it doesn't get stale and monotonous, and it honestly has been working. This time I picked up a lot more on just the characters. I focused a lot on how these characters worked, and I picked up on a sort of dynamic why I think this film partially works as well as it does. It is because they have such a like differing personalities that also merge very similarly. So they both sort of have this thing that they can work together, they can talk, they can bond really easily. But Jesse has this sort of pessimistic quality about him, and Celine generally has this sort of optimist quality to her that it kind of balances out, and I think that is what gives them such a great dynamic and makes their conversations so interesting. Then immediately after I rewatched Before Sunrise, I rewatched Before Sunrise again. Back to back, yes, you heard that right. On the same day, I watched it back to back because I just absolutely love this movie. And I felt like it's so, deal with it. Then I watched Meet the Parents with my parents, and I did not like this one very much at all. There was some decent parts, but for the most part, this was an extremely exhausting film that I really didn't find funny at all. Then I watched The Breakfast Club for the very first time because my mom was urging me to watch it, so we all watched it together as a family, and I really enjoyed it, and this film only keeps growing with me over time. I'm sure this will keep growing on me. It's just so much fun, and I absolutely love the characters and the dynamic they have. For such a simple story, it really is effective. Then I wanted to show my parents The King of Comedy, so this was a rewatch for me for the first time in a while, and I got to show them one of my top 100 favorite films of all time. It still holds up. It is absolutely amazing. It is not my favorite Scorsese, but I still think this movie is fantastic. Robert De Niro gives one of his best performances in this movie, and it's just such a weird and wacky character that it just shows his diversity and his range as an actor. When I just think this movie is so weird for Scorsese, but also he gives it a sort of grounded feel that makes it a little more realistic and believable, but at the same time it is a lot of over-the-top wacky stuff, and it just sticks the landing for everything. Then I decided to show my parents another film that I really love, Leon the Professional, and again with this movie, due to my sort of rating slashes, my rating cuts, this film is no longer a 5 out of 5, but another one that is super high up on my favorites list still, but I do not quite consider this movie a masterpiece. I showed it to my parents and they both thought it was really good, and they thought it was a little weird, which I can definitely see with that. I can agree with that a little bit, but they both really enjoyed it, and I still absolutely love this movie. Then I watched The Graduate with my mom for the very first time, and this is a film I really enjoyed. I think Dustin Hoffman's performance was honestly fantastic. It has some great cinematography in the mix, and it's just such a weird story, but it's also weirdly compelling. It's just really interesting movie every time I think about it, and it's definitely due for a rewatch soon, so I can kind of see more into the details of the filmmaking and all that sort of stuff. Then after rewatching Before Sunrise 2 times earlier in the month, I decided I kind of had to rewatch Before Sunset, and I wrote a nice big long review for it on Letterboxd. If you don't follow me on Letterboxd, definitely make sure to do so. I post reviews basically every single time I watch a movie. This is one of my favorite reviews I've ever written because I kind of get into the deep details of what makes Jesse and Celine's relationship and maybe the consequences of this movie and of the first movie on how their relationship pans out. In general, I think this film is overall kind of more well made and deeper and more profound than Before Sunrise. But Before Sunrise just makes me feel some different way, and it's just some completely different beast. Regardless, Before Sunset, honestly, now on repeat rewatches, I can confirm that I do think this film is a masterpiece. Then I watched The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson, and while being one of the most beautiful and well-shot films I've ever seen, I couldn't get fully invested in the story or the characters. Still a very good movie, but not one that I really loved at all. Then I watched Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, and this is one of my absolute favorite films of all time now. I believe it is in my top 10. It is so profound, so thought-provoking, so depressing, but so hopeful at the same time. This film just sent me on an absolute roller coaster of emotions with some fantastic performances, some of the best visuals I've ever seen in a film. It is just an absolutely incredible movie. Another one that I wrote a really great Letterboxd review for, so definitely check that out. Then I decided to watch a new release, one that a lot of people were raving about, The Suicide Squad. And while I thought it was pretty okay, I didn't think it was much more than that. I was very hopeful for this movie because obviously the concept of the Suicide Squad is really promising. There's a lot you can work with, and I also really like James Gunn. I love Guardians of the Galaxy, so I was pretty excited to see what he had in store. And even considering there are people that I know don't love superhero movies that really enjoyed this film, but I just really couldn't sit that well with me. There was a few characters I enjoyed for the most part. There was a few really amazing scenes, like that Harley Quinn sort of breakout scene. That was fantastic, easily the best scene in the film. But I thought it was so crazy and stupid and over the top, and I know you're gonna say that's the point, but I didn't really enjoy the point. I didn't like what they did with that in this film specifically, but it also kind of lacked a sense of self-awareness that I think is crucial for a weird film like this. Then after absolutely loving The Tree of Life, I decided to watch Terrence Malick's Song to Song, and on first watch, thinking about it, I thought this was a 4.5. I didn't feel confident calling this film a masterpiece, but again, I wrote a very passionate and emotional review on Letterboxd about this movie because these 2010s Malick's films, as you may know if you'd seen my last video, they just send me through an absolute roller coaster of emotions. They're incredibly profound, and the more I thought about this film, the more I thought this was just an absolutely beautiful and amazing piece of art. I do now think this film is a 5 out of 5, a 10 out of 10, whatever you want to call it. It's just fantastic. I absolutely love this movie. And while I don't like it more than Tree of Life or even Knight of Cups, which I will get to later, I do think this film is absolutely phenomenal and definitely deserves a rewatch soon. And I continued on my Malick binge by watching one of his older films, Badlands, and sort of a recurring quality with his older films, I don't like them as much as the newer ones due to the less sort of flamboyant and like extreme visual style that the newer films bring to the table. They also don't have as much of that sort of spiritual and very emotional quality to them. They rely more on the story rather than the emotional connection and the profound nature of the themes and everything that it's tackling with its characters and whatnot. These are just trying to be good movies that are interesting with good stories, which they do have, but overall they're not films that I really resonate with at all, and none of these characters, specifically in Badlands, really interested me at all, and I thought it was an overall boring film for the most part, but it's still well made and a good movie. And I watched George Méliès's A Trip to the Moon, and extremely revolutionary for its time, but nowadays, watching this sorta in my sophomore stages of my film passion, as you might call it, this was a little boring and rudimentary that it really didn't have that much to say, which is fine. I thought it was really cool to see this sort of early stages of filmmaking and VFX and all that sort of stuff, but it wasn't all that amazing. Then I rewatched Jurassic Park, and unfortunately it did drop down a little bit for me. I wasn't totally loving it this time around. I think obviously it's really well made, great story, great suspense, amazing practical effects. It just is a fun movie. It is so great, but I've seen it so many times at this point, and this night specifically, I didn't really want to watch it. I wanted to watch something else, but we watched it anyway, and I don't know, I wasn't fully in love with this movie, but it's still so great. Then I watched Jean-Luc Godard's Contempt, and I thought it was a very interesting look at sort of the behind the scenes of filmmaking while also tackling how that impacts someone's relationships and how work impacts that sort of stuff. And I thought it was really well shot. The framing in this film was absolutely gorgeous. I'll put a few shots up on screen that I actually had screenshotted from the film that I thought were fantastic. And I mean, it's Godard. I'm going to like it. Then I watched Knight of Cups, as I said, another 2010s Malick film that is close to my favorite but doesn't quite surpass Tree of Life. I think this film is absolutely incredible, super profound, emotional. I love the themes it's tackling. I related to this film extremely heavily, and I just think it is absolutely phenomenal and a masterpiece by all accounts. And I watched Rocketman because, I mean, I've heard a lot of people raving about it, specifically Tom. I hear you, Tom. I watched this movie. I absolutely loved it. I mean, flaws and all aside, this movie is so much fun and also very depressing, but like it's just, oh my, it was a breath of fresh air, to be completely honest with you. I love it. I've been listening to Elton John ever since I watched this movie. That last final scene is one of my favorite endings of all time. It's so hopeful and just so amazing after Elton is at his lowest lows, and then he starts singing that I'm Still Standing. It just hits. It hits, man. Then I watched another Charlie Chaplin film, The Gold Rush, and this is now my favorite Chaplin film out of them all. I think it has the coolest concept and is overall visually more interesting than his other films, but also maintaining that funny and romantic sort of dramatic elements to it as well. Then I rewatched Playtime, made sure I paid full attention to every single detail in this film, and it is back up to one of my favorite films of all time. I actually have a poster for it now. It is up on my wall. I love it. This is my second favorite film of all time now. Absolute masterpiece. This is probably the movie that means the most to me in terms of my love for film and my just passion for it in general. Then I watched the live action Cinderella remake, and I really enjoyed it. Super fun, has some pretty good performances, and is just a very entertaining, good movie. Then I watched Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker for the first time, and I honestly don't feel I can put my comprehension of this film into words because I didn't fully understand it, but it is one of the best films I've ever seen. Then I watched Jean-Luc Godard's La Chinoise, and it is a very good movie overall. It is well made, but I just found a lot of it to be very boring. Then I watched Bo Burnham Inside, and despite my skepticism of this film and the annoying repeat of Jeff Bezos' song on TikTok, I actually really enjoyed this. Super creative, funny, and some pretty great music numbers from Bo. Also surprisingly touching and inspirational, so I honestly enjoyed this one a lot. Then I watched the new A24 film, The Green Knight, and I think it is one of the most visually striking films I've seen in quite a while, and it is very meticulously paced, very slow, and kinda just, a lot of people I could see calling this film boring and like it lacks a point, but everything in that ending, in those last like 20 minutes, just hits so hard that it makes the rest of this film absolutely worth it. And I watched the original Candyman in prep for maybe seeing the new one, but because I actually thought this film was really mediocre and not that special, I don't know if I'm gonna see the new one, but we'll see. I think Candyman himself was really cool, but the overall concept was a little not very interesting for me, I guess. And then finally, to end off the month, I sat down and rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for the second time in a much better situation than my first time, and my experience with it was so good. It is my second favorite Tarantino film now. It was dangerously close to dethroning Pulp Fiction, but yeah, I absolutely love this thing now. That is all I watched in the month of August. My school is going to be starting up soon, but I'm still going to try and post as much as possible for you guys. So if I go on some sort of streak of not uploading, you guys know why, obviously. But that is basically going to do it for the video, guys. I got a few videos planned that are not movie related that are going to be coming in the near future, so stay tuned for that. My name's Dominic, and I am out.